Welcome to the EQ Video Tip. I'm your host, Eric Forsetter, and as always, thank you again for joining us for another terrific show. Before we jump into this week's goals, let's review the goal of EQ Video Tip. Before I jump into this week's EQ video tip, a quick reminder that I'm now on Instagram at EQ_with_Eric at Instagram. Would love for you to follow me there as well. Now into this week's tip. How can supportive leaders approach emotional conversations? And let's face it, the past 2, maybe almost 3 years now have been very challenging with the pandemic, wars, and all the other craziness that's going on in our world. And as leaders, we've been forced to handle conversations that are much more difficult than they have been in the past. And for a company to thrive, and not just thrive, but to really innovate and promote collaboration, employees need to feel that they are being heard and that they're being supported, and there are empathetic people out there for them. Now, when I say leader, it doesn't necessarily have to mean you manage people or you're someone's boss, but your coworkers are important. As a leader, that could be anyone in the company. So how do we make ourselves more empathetic and approach these emotional conversations? We're going to jump into some great tips by Sarah Noel Wilson on how to approach these emotional conversations that we may not have had before and that people feel they are drowning or struggling or languishing, and we're going to help them get through it and be as empathetic as possible. Tip number 1. Let's first focus on what emotionally dismissive language actually sounds like as opposed to supportive, so we know the difference between the two. Dismissive phrasing, for example, is, what do you have to be sad about if someone comes to you with a sad problem? Or, you shouldn't be sad, you have this great job or great family or whatever, because it's okay to be sad. You don't want to minimize someone's problem either. You don't want to say, well, everybody feels sad or upset or that way sometimes. You also don't want to have negation in your thoughts, and that could mean something like, hey, well, how could it be worse? Or, that's just a first world problem. Or prescribe a solution for someone. We want to avoid that as well. Don't say you shouldn't worry about this. That's just something you need to sleep on or get rid of. Again, those are the things that we want to avoid. And again, we want to focus on what type of phrasing can work in the next tip. The last thing we also want to be careful of is toxic positivity. And it sounds kind of funny because as a positive person, I always want to say, hey, let's be positive or just look on the bright side. But again, it's okay to relate to someone's emotion and understand it and accept it. But it's important to also understand that they can be sad or have anger or whatever feeling that they have at some point. We're going to go into the next tip and talk about how we should respond when we hear someone's emotions. Tip number 2. So what does emotionally supportive language sound like? And it's very important that the first thing you do is you validate someone's experience. For example, you could say something like, I can see why this is exhausting or troubling or upsetting to you. In doing so, you're telling that person, I see you, I hear you, and not only that, I believe you, which is very important for someone to understand when they're going through a challenging time, no matter what the problem is. It may seem trivial to you, but to that person, it's really important. So take a moment to say, I can see why this situation is exhausting, saddening, whatever it might be. And remember, we want to use emotionally supportive language to help them out. Tip number 3, seek to understand. And what we mean by that is ask them a question like, tell me more about what's going on, or how has that impacted you? It's important for you to let that person open up more and let them experience and expand upon the emotions they're having. Once that happens, then you can guide them to emotional and physical support by asking, well, how can I help you? It sounds like you're in a very troubled time or a very sad time. What can I do to make you in a better spot. Again, you're not looking to give them the final answer, but you are trying to figure out ways that you can support them as well. Our next tip, invite perspective as opposed to prescribing a solution. We've all been there before. We've gone through the similar situation that a friend or a coworker went through, and you're ready to give them the solution because guess what? You've done it and you understand it. But instead of saying, I've been there, here's what you should do, instead offer to them something like this. Would it be helpful to hear what helped me in that similar situation? Again, you're giving perspective that you went through as opposed to prescribing the solution, because your solution may be good for you, but it might not be for them, or it may give them a different perspective on the whole situation. So, invite perspective instead of prescribing a solution. Our last tip, acknowledge and appreciate them. When someone comes to you with a difficult situation, a problem, it's important to understand that they're coming to you because they trust you. And so it's important to say, I can see this is a very hard or difficult situation for you, and I appreciate you trusting me and thanking you for coming to me with this information. That conveys that you appreciate them, you acknowledge the situation, that it's a difficult one for them, and it reinforces that there's safety in the future if they need to come to you again for support, and that you're here to help as well. So make sure you take the time to appreciate and acknowledge their situation. That concludes this week's EQ video tip. Hopefully that helps you no matter what you do within your company as an individual contributor, the new person on the team, or the leader of the company. We all have to be supportive and empathetic of one another, and one of the best ways to do that is to look through some of these tips and understand how to give supportive language when someone comes to you with a problem. Here's a quick review of what we went through today. So that concludes our EQ video tip for today. Try incorporating some of these tips into your daily routine. But remember, use what works best for you and personalize it for yourself. Thank you always to our great research team for providing us with some great tips today. As always on EQ video tip, we want to end with gratitude. So thank you for watching. We really appreciate it. Here are some resources that you can use if you want more information on EQ going forward. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you.